And just like that, Mets fans, we're right back at it with our second video on the day. And that's how you know it's off-season time, baby, because reports come out when you least expect or maybe when you most expect it, depending on who you're talking to. Either way, we have plenty to break down, and this one having everything to do with the polar bear and Pete Alonso and his contract demands heading into what's going to be a lengthy negotiation throughout the course of the offseason. How we doing, everybody? It's your guy, Wardy, here, breaking down the latest in Mets land. And as we broke down a video earlier today, on Kyle Schwarber, Munetaka Murakami, Eric Chavez's comments, and a whole lot more. Please make sure to check that out after you guys watch today's video, because we're going to break down the reporting that dropped just over the past couple hours at the time of this video first coming out here on October 11th from Mike Puma of the New York Post, stating that Pete Alonso has his eyes set on how many years in a contract. That is what we're going to get into. Ultimately, why Alonso believes he deserves this amount of years versus how much he's likely going to get, at least in the opinions of mine and many across baseball, where the Mets will likely stand in these negotiations, the likelihood, unlikelihood of the polar bear returning in Flushing, Queens, and so much more. Hit that like and subscribe button on your way in, everybody, as it's a great way to support the platform, and let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below to not only Alonso's contract asking price, more so on the years than the dollars right now, even though we have an assumption that we will get into, but also ultimately on if you think Alonso's going to return to this Mets team or not. I want a simple yes or no from you guys in the comments. Shout out to our amazing sponsors that make every show here happen, that being at SeatGeek, that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Head over to SeatGeek and utilize my promo code WARDY10, link down below in the description, because you're going to get 10% off your next ticket purchase. And Manta Sleep, head over to mantasleep.com and use my promo code WARDY, because you're going to get 10% off the best sleep masks in the game today, all down below for you guys to check out. And thank you so much in advance for doing exactly that. Now, you guys see the highlight reel, which is Alonso beside me, but let's get into these Alonso remarks and ultimately what they mean for the Mets and potentially Alonso's future. We're going to go to the reporting here. Again, that is of Mike Puma there, that you guys know, of the New York Post. And as you guys can see, a look at Pete Alonso's looming free agency, including what he will be looking for in contract length. And in said article, which I will have linked down below for you guys to check out, there's a paywall, but don't worry, I'll tell you guys what you want to know in this one. And that's that Pete Alonso is expected to seek a 7-year contract, eerily similar to ones that we have seen with guys like Marcus Semien, among others, in recent offseasons. So you know how Freddie Freeman got 6 years, right? You know how he got that much money and that much term? Well, Alonso is more than likely seeking around the same, if not more, and right now it appears to be more. Now, let me be the first to say, no one, and I literally mean no one that is a Mets fan, should be surprised by this. I know when you look at the thumbnail and you're saying Alonso wants how many years? 7 years? It's a hard thing to swallow and digest, but it really isn't. If you followed along with the Alonso negotiations from a year plus ago, understood how things went in said negotiations last year, and what the difference is from this offseason versus a year ago. Let's get into it all. Let's start with the obvious. Pete Alonso is a Scott Boras client, meaning Scott Boras, who is the most highly repped agent in all Major League Baseball, who makes far more money than any other agent right now in the game, and for good reason. He is notorious for seeking the longest term deal possible, if not a short-term high AAV contract, if he can't find the term for his client that he's looking for, i.e. Pete Alonso from an offseason ago. Because let's not forget, everybody, Alonso initially sought north of 7 years to begin last year's offseason. Even after his underwhelming regular season, his playoff performance, along with everything he's done in Queens to this point, is what was heavily backing his right to make that decision and say, hey, I want this many years. The problem for Alonso is he had the qualifying offer attached to him, meaning that any team not named the Mets that tried to sign him last offseason would have had to give up a draft pick for the Mets to obtain. And a lot of teams didn't want to do that, so they settled with plan B, C, and D options for first base. And let's face it, as much as we love Alonso, and I know that you guys have your conflicting opinions about what I'm about to say here, but Alonso statistically and with the eye test that we saw this year is a defensive liability. I get it. Alonso throws his body out there more than anyone else, and that's in part the problem for him. That's what concerns me about durability long-term at first base. But Alonso's stubbornness to not want to deviate away off of first base did not do himself any favors in last year's negotiations. So much so that we watched in real time every team that had a team need for a first base or DH, the dominoes continue to fall. One by one, one after another, and before you knew it, Pete Alonso was on an island by himself, looking like Will Smith walking into the house where he's the only one there from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, if you know that scene. And now Alonso is not on the same island as he was a year ago. That led him to signing that multi-year deal with the Mets, but had an opt-out after the first and second seasons there, making just under $30 million per. Alonso now, after a very good season that you guys see down below, one of the better ones for sure with people when looking at the RBIs, the clutch ability with runners, the scoring position, you name it. Lots of love about Alonso. It was 40% above league average as a batter, but now that he cannot have the qualifying offer attached to him, while also knowing that Alonso, according to this article from Mike Puma there, the New York Post, had very animated negotiations down the stretch with the Mets last year. Like, he was pretty heated apparently, and made it known to Steve Cohen especially, and David Stearns, his plans to be hitting 500 homers and going to the Hall of Fame, end quote. And whether it's with the Mets or another team. Alonso's impassioned statements may have left an impression on Cohen, who hadn't really gotten an opportunity to build as much of a relationship with him up until that point, at least according to Mike Puma there of the New York Post, which is interesting. So again, should we be surprised by Alonso asking for 7 years? No, by no stretch of the imagination should you be. This is standard negotiation practice with Scott Boras and how he goes about these things, right? Scott Boras has also hurt a lot of players in negotiations in recent years by seeking that kind of long-term bag for players that otherwise weren't really deserving of it, weren't generational talents, but were being marketed as such, and that came back to bite them in more ways than one. And I think for Alonso, not only did Scott Boras overplay his hand, Alonso overplayed his hand a year ago, and the odds were against them given the qualifying offer. That really did not help them. This time around, though, knowing that qualifying offer is not going to be attached to Alonso, this changes the complexion of his pursuit quite a bit. Now, I get it. Any team that initially sees the reporting by Puma today of 7 years says, yep, right, okay. But that's all part of this. You start high at 7. It's no different than if, say, I walked into a pawn shop right now and try to, see how much money I could get for this thing. The guy says this, and I'm like, okay, well, we have to try to at least meet in the middle, if not be closer to my number, hopefully. So Alonso's always going to start at least 7, but he's a defensive liability of a first baseman, and if you think that's controversial, that's fine. We're all entitled to our opinions, but the numbers are what they are, and as someone who's watched every single game of Pete Alonso's career as a New York Met, was in attendance for his first ever game with a home run at Citi Field, I can tell you firsthand, Alonso is too Jekyll and Hyde to be relied upon as a reliable first base option for this team. Now, does he have flashes of brilliance? No doubt. But he also has costly boneheaded plays that make Lucas Studa look like a stud versus the reality of what he did back in 2015, and we all know what happened there. So the point I'm trying to make here is that while Alonso, I appreciate his defensive efforts, he and his stubbornness at first is only going to hurt himself down the road here, which is why in this article by Puma, it is noted that Alonso's now recognizing a bit more about his lack of maybe defensive upside, or knowing that the durability may not be in his favor to have longevity to be as consistent of a hitter as he is by throwing his body out there as much as he is. Being the only first baseman in baseball that takes the kind of damage that he does on a year-by-year, day-by-day basis. The point is that Alonso's recognizing more that he may have to transition to DH. However, it's still uncertain when he would be willing to do that, because this is what this comes down to. It comes down to two key factors for Steve Cohen, David Stearns, Pete Alonso, and this New York Mets squad to have a reunion happen yet again. It is factor number 1, DH. And when I say 1 and 2, it's in no particular order. I like to make that clear. Factor number 1 is DH. If Alonso gets his head out of his derriere and finally shows a willingness to play DH for the betterment of club based on offensive and defensive structure, mind you, an Alonso who was a liability to this team this past year, who had multiple costly errors for the Mets that dictated ends of ball games. That was a fact. Cue the National Series in June. Cue the multiple series since then, towards the end of season. You guys know exactly what I'm referring to there with the toss to Ryan Stank, among others. Point stands here with the Polar Bear and Pete Alonso. If he now shows a greater appetite and a willingness to play DH and have the Mets bring in someone that's more defensive-minded for first base, or to lengthen their lineup should they wish, but to make sure that Alonso doesn't need to be their everyday guy there, it completely changes the viewpoint on Alonso. Because if Alonso transitions to a DH in the next couple seasons, this is a man who I think we all agree and believe can be one of the best DHs in baseball. I wholeheartedly believe it. I see what Kyle Schwarber's doing. I say to myself, Alonso has all the makings to be that guy as long as he mentally can lock into it. We know he has struggled in the past trying to lock into it in small sample sizes, but doing it throughout an entire course of a season where that's mainly his role, I think he'll be able to get acclimated. Just give it time like anything else. So for Alonso, if he's willing to bite the bullet and finally be what he's supposed to be, in my opinion, and that's more of a DH profile than he is a first base profile, then I think it would be foolish for the Mets not to do everything in their power to bring him back, but still stand their ground and want Alonso around 25 to 30 mil AAV on north of 5 years instead of 7. And I think that's the common ground that a lot of fans I'm seeing on X, including myself, are falling in. I'm willing to go, as a fan, at least north of 5 years on Alonso with creative opt-outs that maybe favor the player too, because honestly, why not? If we're just going to renegotiate these things, it's really not the end of the world, and move on from there. You know, you have the CBA that's going to freeze after next offseason, after next season or so you do have concern about, you know, what the payout structure will be for players after the next CBA is eventually negotiated, potentially after a season-long lockout. Who knows what's going to happen there right now? So there's a lot of risk for Alonso in this year's negotiations. Make sure that he does it right versus how he felt he probably did it wrong a year ago. So factor number one, again, DH. We all know that when it comes to these Alonso negotiations. And factor number two is, as I already mentioned, the term of the contract. Not a chance in hell, and pardon my French, everybody, that David Stearns is going to go out of his way to want to comfortably lock up Alonso to 7 years. Now, could that change if you have an adamant Steve Cohen saying, I don't care, we can dump him down the road if he doesn't age well, like, we will figure it out, just make sure you lock him up, then that's a different discussion. Because that's the beauty about this circumstance, at least, is that you don't love the idea of giving a guy like Alonso that many years. I really do not believe the Mets are going to go there. I don't think any baseball team is going to go there. I think it's a call me bluff situation. You know, I do not. Until it happens, I have to see to believe it, with Pete Alonso accepting a 7-year contract from someone outside the New York Mets, assuming it's not going to be them. Because there's a reason why players of his profile don't get that deal. The fact that Freddie Freeman didn't get that kind of contract when Freddie Freeman is 3 times the first baseman that Alonso is when looking at well-rounded ability as well as how good he is defensively. It's silly to me. It really is silly. But what isn't silly is how these negotiations inevitably go. And I realize I'm also like word salad all over the place here, and I do apologize for that. I just have a lot of varying opinion on this to say, because we've been through the song and dance already with Alonso from last offseason. We saw how it went. We saw what negatively impacted him, and that was a qualifying offer, as well as just ridiculous demands. And it's like anything else. You start at 7, Mets will probably start at like 3 or 4 that'll insult him, and then they'll meet more in the middle there and potentially the 4 or 5 year range if they really want a reunion to happen. And the Mets go about this offseason in similarity to how they did a year ago, meaning that they want to put themselves in a position where you're going to have a guy like Alonso come back, but it's more at their term than anything else. And Alonso may, in fact, walk to seek what's best for him and his family, as he's just starting a family. He just had a child. Congratulations to him and his wifey. A very exciting feeling. And knowing Alonso's a father now, the priorities are a bit different, I'm sure, for him. So it's not only about prioritizing the bag, but doing what's best for your family. And I think Alonso's going to do everything in his power to make sure that's right, potentially beyond necessarily where exactly the location is. You know, I think that this is going to be one of those things that simply comes down to Mets aren't going to box themselves where they're the only team for him to negotiate with, like they did a year ago, basically. And I think he's going to be able to blossom and take advantage of that and potentially get some lucrative offers that are absurd and maybe not as willing by the Mets that other teams would be able to do, because David Stearns wants to amplify defense on this team. Locking down Pete Alonso long-term does not necessarily fit that category unless he shows a further willingness to play DH, where it's okay to be a bad defender because no one's asking you to defend. This is a fascinating one to go by, because you see how last year went. You see the ups and the downs, especially for David Stearns, his first like true big negotiation in an offseason for the Mets as Pobo, paired with obviously the Juan Soto signing this past offseason as well. Really trying to make a big splash for this team. I think there's a world where we could live as fans where Alonso's not a New York Met next year. I think there's absolutely a world where we can't live in a world where that happens too, because we know how vital, we know how important, we know how valuable. He's the home run king, but he's a man who wants to be here. He's a man who feels he deserves to be here, and he's one who's destined to do greatness regardless on the team that he's on. So if we can hammer down A bit on the years. AAV I'm not worried about, because going back to what I meant to say earlier, the Mets are in a very fortunate position where, unlike a lot of other teams in baseball, where one bad contract can completely derail their way of operating and spending dollars elsewhere, while contracts being inflated doesn't help the Mets by any stretch of the imagination, it doesn't hurt them to the same magnitude as others when you have an owner who's willing to bite the bullet on multiple occasions. Now, how long is Steve Cohen going to have an appetite for biting the bullet on contracts that maybe don't age well? That's a great question that we will continue to find out as time goes on with him as owner. But for the time being, right now, Alonso, if say you sign him to, let's say, a 5-year contract, and he's not looking good after 3, and he's not transitioning well to DH, then you worry about that then. Is there anyone worried immediately about Pete Alonso's production? No. And is there any rational Mets fan out there genuinely worried that the Mets wouldn't be able to figure themselves out if they had a bad contract by Alonso or someone else to deal with? No, not at all. And the reason why we're not is because Steve Cohen has never not shown that further willingness to do whatever it takes to try to bring a winner here to Queens, even if that means that we have to shake up aspects of the team that we've otherwise liked and enjoyed, or further amplify and further appreciate guys who are homegrown talents that deserve to be here long term. All signs are pointing towards the Mets bringing back Alonso, barring changes. We will hear reporting throughout the offseason that suggests otherwise. Our emotions, I'm sure, will go up and down a roller coaster just like a normal 162 of a season, but when the dust settles, when it's all said and done, I do think that the Mets will either not have Alonso return because he will get a longer-term contract than what they're willing to do, and you can understand that to a degree, or Alonso does return the Mets, maybe a bit more inflated than you love, but it's going to work out, and hopefully for the Mets, they don't let that impact their way of operating the way that they really haven't let a lot of other contracts get too much in the way of making proper decisions since Steve Cohen has become owner. So Mets fans, I definitely want to hear from you guys in the comments down below regarding this reporting that Alonso is now apparently seeking around 7 years of a contract. Do you guys think he's going to get anywhere close to 7? Do you think he'll get 7? Do you think he'll get 6? Do you think he'll get 5? Whatever the case may be regarding contract structure, I would love to hear your predictions in the comments down below. And also, just a simple question that I asked before, and I'll ask again. Do you think Pete Alonso is going to return to this Mets team? Because as I'm double-checking these quotes now, looking at those similar contracts that we saw, that being in Scott Boras negotiating for Marcus Semien and Matt Chapman over the past couple of years. They both got 6-year extensions on different types of contracts, obviously. Is that what Alonso is destined to get, regardless on if it's a Met or not? Or will we see something more in favor of the Mets that we saw from a year ago and the 3, potentially 4-year range? Whatever the case may be, drop them down below. Check out my other video that dropped earlier today on the Mets targeting Munetaka Murakami, Kyle Schwarber pursuit, what that means for the Mets right now, if there is one, and why he may be done in Philadelphia as a Philly. Eric Chavez's comments that had everyone going overreacting rather to his remarks from the past day or two. Check it all out in case you guys have interest. Thank you guys so much again for watching. And as always, no matter what, everybody, let's go Mets. Peace out.